Hi, Eric.
Hi, Vanessa.
So, how did you get to work this morning?
The usual way. I took my flying car.
That's very exciting. This is how everybody at the Sidewalk Labs office gets to the office, by the way.
No, I walked to the train. You?
Well, I usually do the same thing, but this morning I was checking on Twitter and I saw there were delays on my train. So I decided to try something new, something I'd seen popping up in my neighborhood. There's a Revel on my street, on my block.
What is a Revel?
So a Revel is a moped. So it's kind of like a Vespa, maybe a little bit bigger, and they're dockless. So you download an app and you can see where they are in the city. Ooh, things are happening. So after I paid and uploaded my license, I put on my helmet and I thought I was ready to ride to work. But when I opened up the map portion of the app, I realized that you can only revel in designated zones. And those zones are Brooklyn and Queens, but not Manhattan.
Okay. So you can't ride your Revel to work.
No, you cannot revel into Manhattan yet anyway. The city's kind of taking a more cautious approach to rolling them out, and I can kind of see why. Okay, green button ready. Yes, here we go. Where's the brake? I'm gonna hit a car. Not gonna. Oh my god. I fell.
What have I told you about technology?
I know. It was heavier than I thought it would be, and I fell, and
You didn't hit that car?
I didn't hit the car.
Okay, you didn't hurt yourself.
I didn't hurt myself.
Okay.
I did survive, and I successfully did ride the moped. Got a little breeze happening. This is nice. 8 miles an hour to the ferry.
Okay, so you can definitely ferry into Manhattan.
Yeah, but the one downside is that it is not officially part of the MTA, which means I cannot use my Metro card, so you need a whole other app.
All right, well, but unless kind of the ferry operates differently from how I remember, you kind of have to stop once you get to land.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So how did you come the rest of the way?
Right, so as soon as I got off the ferry, I actually saw a city bike station. But again, that's a whole other payment system.
Right, you got to pay yet again.
Yet again. Says MasterCard. Okay, I think I can only use a MasterCard. Okay. Wait, is my only option a day pass? I just want one ride. So yes, I had to download another app. And then when I finally did pay for the bike and unlock it, it's not like it was easy after that either, because there's potholes in the bike lanes, there are fire trucks in the bike lanes, delivery trucks, and at one point, I swear it was like a movie, I saw a cart rolling out of a truck and into the bike lane just as I was about to pass. So, I mean, I guess it's just the infrastructure isn't really holding up to everyone in this space right now.
Right, and bike share is not even new. So
Right.
This is not even something that popped up overnight. The city has planned this for years and years and is still struggling to create the space for cyclists along the street. And frankly, let's give credit. New York's one of the best at
Right.
this. So this
Right.
is a tough problem.
And it's only going to get tougher with all of these new modes coming in the future.
But imagine a city that was set up for you to take any mode at any time.
And instead of it being difficult and siloed and inconvenient, it would be seamless, integrated, maybe even fun.
Welcome to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs.
Each episode, we explore ideas and innovations that could transform cities. I'm Vanessa Quirk.
And I'm Eric Jaffe.
And in this episode, we're going to explore an idea that would make it way easier to get around cities without owning a car.
Mobility on demand.
Mopeds, scooters, e-bikes, hoverboards.
There's a term people are using for all these new modes that have been popping up on city streets: micromobility.
The essential quality of micromobility, as I defined it, is anything that's not a car. In fact, my definition of micromobility goes all the way to 500 kilograms in weight, which is not because I think that that's a good weight, but rather because I think no car can be made less than that.
That's Horace Deju. He's an analyst from Finland who's currently writing the book on micromobility. And the reason that Horace defines micromobility in this way, in contrast to cars, is that the car is not the most efficient mode for most of the trips that we make.
The most common trips are short trips. In fact, overwhelmingly so. In the US, the most common trips are less than 5 miles. The whole premise of micromobility is saying, hey, a vehicle that weighs a fraction of your own personal weight should be enough to move you around for most of the trips you need to make. It's like getting a pickup truck and using it once a year to take the Christmas tree home. You're carrying all the capacity the rest of the year, throwing away so much energy and CO2 in order to have that optionality.
There's another way that these micromobility vehicles are different from cars. Cars take years of development to get in front of consumers, which means they always lag behind the times.
We still have CD players in cars. We still have cassette players in cars. And we'll probably have whatever Bluetooth exists today, it will be obsolete 20 years from now, and we'll still have it in cars.
But a micromobility vehicle can be iterated on, improved, and put to market in a matter of weeks, kind of like a phone. And Horace realized this after his first encounter with an e-bike.
When I looked at it, I said, this is a smartphone on wheels.
Horace actually worked in the phone business for years, and he thinks that micromobility vehicles like phones will one day be ubiquitous.
Now, arguments I was having with people early on when I was saying everybody's going to have a smartphone, people said there's no way that there will ever be sufficient bandwidth for 1 billion people to use smartphones. And here we are with 3+ billion people using smartphones on 3G plus networks. It starts with the device, by the way. We didn't build airports and then had airplanes show up. In fact, there were decades of airplanes before an airport was able to be set up. It's always been the other way around.
Horace's point here is that the technology comes first. The infrastructure comes second. It's why all of these scooters, for example, have been so controversial in so many cities. They've popped up before scooter parking spots or scooter-friendly streets have been developed.
But it also means that cities are at a moment where they have to try and prepare for all these new mobility options. And not just the physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure that can help coordinate them all.
Coordination is key. Otherwise, we'll just be adding even more complexity to our already congested and chaotic streets.
If we continue as we are, putting more and more vehicles on the road, nobody's going to be able to move through a city.
That's Bibiana McHugh. She's a manager of mobility and location-based services at TriMet, the public transportation provider in Portland, Oregon.
We provide bus, light rail, streetcar, tram, commuter rail.
Bibiana and her colleagues at TriMet helped develop a key piece of digital infrastructure, one that you may not know about, but that transformed the way we get around cities.
The story starts in 2005, back when getting around a city via public transit required a map, maybe a set of timetables, and a lot of patience.
It was very difficult to go into a city that you knew nothing about and find out how to get from point A to point B. So I reached out to several mapping companies such as Google Transit, MapQuest, I believe Yahoo.
So you just emailed all of these companies?
Back then, it was actually fax.
Oh my gosh.
Believe it or not. I actually have the original faxes that I sent.
Eventually, Bibiana connected with a developer at Google named Chris Harrelson, who wanted to standardize the scheduling data for every kind of public transit. Bus schedules, train schedules, tram schedules, all in the same format.
And as luck would have it, Portland was perfectly positioned to make it happen first.
There are a lot of transit systems that are siloed or proprietary. TriMet took a different approach. We have a centralized database where all of our data is housed. And that was, I think, really the key.
Soon, Bibiana and Chris released GTFS, the General Transit Feed Specification.
GTFS is basically a standardized format that represents schedule data for transit services. At the time, open data wasn't really in fashion, if you will. And a lot of transit agencies, their first reaction was, well, we're going to charge Google and other companies for access to our data.
But as soon as travelers understood the benefits of GTFS, that it would allow a navigation app to tell you when the next train or bus or trolley was coming, then they started demanding it.
Other cities followed Portland's lead. GTFS took off.
And GTFS also allowed TriMet to keep innovating. In 2009, Portland used it to develop a platform called the Open Trip Planner, the first truly multimodal trip planner.
Open Trip Planner actually integrates and chains trips together and really integrates the private mobility service providers with the public. So a great example of this is I was at the airport, and to get home across town, it would have taken me an hour and a half on transit because of the schedule. So I pulled up the Uber app, and it would have cost me about $35. I pulled out our new app, which we were prototyping at the time, the new multimodal trip planner. The app directed me to take Uber to the first stop on the line 75. And this actually cut the price in half.
So I know that a lot of private ride-hail companies are like expanding and including not just cars, but scooters and bikes in their apps nowadays. And I'm wondering, was it difficult getting a private service provider like Uber to open up and collaborate with you on this?
It was very difficult.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me of Google Transit and GTFS taking off, where they're not quite sure how this is going to affect their business.
So you're saying that with GTFS, it was the cities who were the reluctant ones, but now with Open Trip Planner, it's the private companies who are more unsure about open data.
Exactly. It has completely flipped. And governments providing access to their data in an open fashion is now the norm. Now the focus is on the private mobility service providers. It may come down to, policy and regulation so that all private service providers will make their data accessible.
Without those providers, you can't have a truly seamless multimodal experience, one where you can link trips and use one simple payment system.
Right, and it's not just about public and private mobility providers sharing their data. They also need to have open transaction systems, too.
The vision for everyone down the road is to click once and have all of your trips booked and scheduled and awaiting for you.
Portland is helping us move towards that vision. Together with cities like LA and DC, they're leading the movement for open mobility data here in the U.S.
And some countries are even further along.
My name is Sampo Hietanen. Do not try to pronounce it. It's a Finnish name.
Another Finn?
Not only another Finnish person, a Finn who pioneered yet another mobility concept. This time it's mobility as a service, or MaaS for short.
MaaS.
My understanding is you actually coined the term mobility as a service, or at least popularized it. I'm wondering how you define it.
Popularized it, yes. How do I define it? If you want the simple version of it, for the people, for the users, it's a promise of anywhere, anytime on a whim.
Whim is also the name of an app that Sampo's company developed in 2016, using, in fact, the Open Trip Planner platform that Bibiana talked about. And interestingly, in 2017, the Finnish government actually passed a law requiring all transportation service providers to develop open interfaces.
Okay, so that means that Whim probably benefited from kind of new access to all that open data.
Yeah, which means that anyone in Helsinki can sign up for Whim, open the app, and use any modes they want, public or private, in any combination.
We combine all of them into a really, really simple user interface. With one payment, you can just ride them all. You don't need to jump from one app to another.
Whim's subscription package is kind of like Netflix for mobility. For a monthly fee, you can ride any of the services in your package.
In a way, we open a golden key to your city and to your needs.
So can you give me an example of how Whim works in Helsinki?
Sure. Say you want to go from your hotel to a karaoke bar on the other side of town.
Okay, you know me well. This is a likely scenario.
All right. So the app shows you a few options. Now you're feeling particularly peppy.
Like I do.
And so you decide, I'm going to take a bike share.
Okay.
Then you're halfway there, and maybe it starts to rain and the bike share doesn't look like such a great decision.
Or maybe I feel less peppy all of a sudden.
You're less peppy. You dock up the bike, and then you switch to a train. Now, mind you, the app has paid for all of this. You don't have to worry about downloading a new app. You don't have to use any new fare payments into the kiosks. You just keep going on your journey.
That sounds much more pleasant than my previous experiences. Okay, so
Right, you can focus on your karaoke.
exactly, the right song. It's very important. Okay, so what about the car shares, though? Is that included? Because at the end of the night, I'm definitely going to want to take a car home.
That's right. Yeah, the app works with taxis and other ride services, too.
Okay, so this all sounds incredibly convenient, but I'm not sure your average American would want to bother with this when you can just drive. I mean, this isn't Europe.
Well, Sampo told me he gets exactly this kind of skepticism a lot.
I've given over 2,000 speeches about this everywhere in the world. And one of those mysticism is that, yeah, maybe, you guys in Finland, you're so forward thinking and all of this. And then they say, well, we here in US, we here in Switzerland, we in Sweden, we here and there. We just love to own our cars, don't we? We just love to do that. It's actually not true. All we actually do desire is convenience and service level.
Sampo's found that mobility as a service offers so much convenience that it appeals to all kinds of people, wherever you're from or however old you are.
There was this one journalist who called me from the biggest local newspaper for something completely different. And then at the end of the interview, he said, I'm a 50-plus guy, and I've always been a big car enthusiast. And now me and my wife took up whim. And me being a bit shocked, I said, well, why on earth now? And he said it nicely, look, before it's been too much hassle that I have to worry about these different modes, and there's never been anyone who's on my side. They just tried to sell their part of the whole story. And now that you guys have it here, it felt convenient enough, so we gave up the car. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of what T-Ford brought to people is freedom. And unless we provide similar or more freedom, there's no way we can disrupt the whole mobility. We really have to up our game to be as good as owning a car.
So I can definitely see that Sampo's offering a really compelling alternative to car ownership here.
But achieving the type of freedom he's talking about, it isn't just about convenience. It's about cost and knowing that what you're paying is definitely less than owning a car.
One of the allures of thinking about mobility as a service is taking away the mental burden of worrying about cost.
That's Karina Lee, Associate Director for New Mobility at Sidewalk Labs.
For our Toronto project, Karina and her team imagined a neighborhood of the future designed to make mobility as convenient as possible.
Extensive public transit, bike share, ride-hail services, all accessible via an integrated mobility package. It's mobility on demand.
And to make sure that package would save people enough money to make them want to give up their car, they crunched the numbers.
We looked at what it cost on average to own a car in Toronto, especially in downtown, and we found that on average it cost just a bit over $10,000 a year. Yet, only 50% of the car-owning households would drive it on a typical day.
So I bet you a lot of these folks are already taking transit to work and probably still getting a taxi when they come home late from a night out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we looked at the typical mobility needs of, let's say, a typical 2-adult household, looking at combinations of how much they would use public transit, bike share, maybe some ride-hailing taxi, and some car share or car rental needs over the weekends or for trips out of town. And we looked at how much a hypothetical mobility package would cost for this family. And we derived that it will cost about $6,500. So that's actually about a 40% reduction in just mobility spending.
So I know that a lot of people today would say, I mean, yes, I know it's cheaper not to own a car, but it's just so much harder to get around without one. So it's not really a choice for me. But if a mobility package can offer a frictionless way to travel that, combines cost and convenience, then it does become a viable choice.
Yeah.
I think it's not a stretch to suggest that you're giving people a choice that they've never really had before. as a household. You can either buy the car as you've always done and you'll use it sometimes, or you can try this package, and we know that on a month-to-month basis, you're going to end up paying less, and we believe we've calculated a way for you to meet all of your other needs in there. So this is like buying a car, but it's not just a car.
It's about buying mobility. And this amount, according to our calculations, will be significantly cheaper than the cost of owning and operating a car.
So let's talk about how you see this mobility on demand working in the city of the future. Let's say I wake up in the morning and I see that the subway is totally delayed. What happens next?
I would just press a button in the app and it offers me 3 options. I can either take the alternative bus route and it will give me all the detailed directions since that's a route that I'm not so familiar with, or it will unlock me a bike share bike and tell me directions of how to get there, or they could call me a shared ride-hail ride. But, to incentivize me to take the least costly to the package and also the more, sustainable way, the feature also would reward me. If I take the bus, maybe I'll get $5 of credit back. If I take the bike share, I might get $3. If I choose to take the shared rides, I just wouldn't get anything, but at least it's all paid for. I don't have to worry about it.
And you'd pay for all this from an app on your phone?
Yeah. Also, it could be a ring, it could be a fob.
What would you prefer?
It doesn't matter that much to me,
don't
frankly.
care?
Yeah, it could be
a
a
big
card.
gold medallion
Yeah.
that dangles.
Okay, let me throw a harder scenario at you here. What about one of those weekend trips that you mentioned before?
For people who want to travel out of town, especially on weekends, a lot of them at present will face this issue that they try to book a car share or a car rental vehicle 3 days or a week in advance and find that all the cars nearby are gone or only the most expensive ones will remain.
Yeah.
And
That happened to me 2 weeks ago. That was very, very, very frustrating.
right? With the package, you actually are getting a price guarantee, and that takes the anxiety of it out. You don't have to worry about, when I rent a car, is it going to be $100 this weekend or actually $325?
But how many trips did you calculate that a family could take for it to still be cheaper than owning a car?
We just assumed every other month you would do a weekend car rental over the course of a year.
Well, that sounds pretty good. Certainly more than I do now.
Okay, I have one last scenario for you, Corinna.
Okay, sounds good.
Costco. So the whole reason that I go to Costco is to buy items in bulk to save money, right? But if I take a taxi or a rideshare home, which you kind of need to because you've got a lot of stuff, then the savings can just disappear. And I feel like that's why a lot of people still hold on to cars in cities for these kinds of trips.
Costco it's so fascinating, right? It's like the product of suburbanization.
Mm-hmm.
You build up a supercenter with a big parking lot so everyone can drive there and buy all their needs for the next week or two.
Right.
But we're envisioning a 15-minute neighborhood. So all your essential daily needs will be satisfied within a 15-minute walk. So what are we talking about? Getting groceries, pharmacies, buying your regular, toothpaste and toilet paper and things like that.
So since this is such a compact neighborhood, I wouldn't need a taxi. I could take something like maybe a cargo bike.
Yeah, I think cargo bikes would definitely be an option. One thing I'm very excited about is can we have some sort of a school pickup and drop-off service that actually uses bikes and the bike lanes that we have. That's essentially like a cargo bike for kids. You can fit multiple of them in, and you could just take them to school and back. I call this magic school bike.
So in the city of the future, all these modes would work together. The trains, the boats, the buses, the mopeds, even the magic school bikes.
What about my flying car?
Eventually.
Since all the data would be standardized and payment systems would be integrated, multimodal trips would be frictionless.
And it's not just the digital infrastructure, of course. The city itself would be designed to make these kinds of trips easier.
In the neighborhood of the future, transit would be the backbone. Businesses and shops and schools and other services would be near homes, so you could walk or bike to them if you wanted.
So all those trips that used to require cars, they wouldn't anymore.
And since you don't need as many cars, you don't need as many parking spots. And that means you can have much more space for parks or plazas or whatever the community wants.
That would also just make a really vibrant urban environment as well, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about mobility, but it's really about what is the type of place and the feel of the place and the quality of life that you want to have.
Thank you for listening to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs. Your hosts are Vanessa Quirk and me, Eric Jaffe. We are produced by Benjamin Walker and Andrew Calloway.
Mixed by Zach McNeese. Special thanks to all who made this episode possible. Horace Deju, Bibiana McHugh, Sampo Hietanen, and I'm sorry about the pronunciation there, Sampo, Karina Lee, and Willa Ng.
Our art is by the great Tim Cow. Our music is composed by Adam James Levine Arity. If you want to hear more of Adam's work, you can check out his band, Lost Amsterdam, at amsterdamlost.com.
To learn more about Sidewalk Labs, visit our website at sidewalklabs.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of the page.
See you in the future.